As the sun sets over the battered skyline of Gaza, the realities on the ground grow ever grimmer. Developments on the ground in Gaza reveal a very grim reality. The Israeli army now controls 77% of the territory through relentless ground invasions, bombardments and forced evacuations. Key areas such as Qnews, Jabalia and Nusayrat have become focal points for Israeli aggression, leaving civilians trapped amid the escalating violence. Meanwhile, Israel faces deep political divisions over the future of the war, with some government figures questioning the viability of a continued military operation. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is caught between mounting international isolation and a growing internal unrest as protests surge and political allies voice dissent. How will these pressures shape Gaza's future and the fragile humanitarian efforts underway? We'll ask this and more here on In Depth. Welcome to In Depth. I'm Ram Morsi. Israel faces unprecedented international isolation as key Western allies publicly condemn Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's ongoing military operations in Gaza and the blocking of humanitarian aid. According to Axios, once enjoying broad support after the October 7th war on Gaza, Netanyahu's government has lost backing, especially after ending a ceasefire in March and escalating military action. Leaders from France, Canada and the UK have threatened further measures unless Israel allows aid and halts its offensive. In response, Israel has accused critics of supporting Hamas. Diplomatic fallout includes suspended trade talks and new sanctions, while Israel has agreed to some aid deliveries. Continued plans for mass displacement in Gaza risk deepening its global isolation.
As of today, the Gaza Strip remains engulfed in a devastating military siege and deepening political turmoil within Israel. Israeli forces now control approximately 77% of Gaza, following Operation Gideon's Chariots, an extensive ground offensive launched in early May aimed at defeating Hamas and regaining full control over the territory. Key areas such as Khan Yunis, Jabalia and Nusayrat have been heavily bombarded, with thousands of Palestinians killed and widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure. The humanitarian situation is dire. Since early March, Israel has imposed a strict siege, blocking all humanitarian aid, including food, fuel, and medical supplies. Over 436,000 Palestinians have been forcibly displaced amid ongoing military orders, with entire neighborhoods declared no-go zones. UN agencies report critical shortages of essential supplies, exacerbating suffering, especially among children and the elderly. Inside Israel, political divisions are intensifying. A member of ruling Likud party has openly criticized the Gaza war policy, clashing with the defense minister. Israel's foreign minister has warned that continued blocking of humanitarian aid risks further isolating Israel internationally and fueling internal unrest. Prime Minister Netanyahu faces mounting pressure as widespread protests and political dissent threaten his government's stability. While Netanyahu has indicated a willingness to consider a temporary ceasefire to secure detainee releases, he insists on continue the broader military campaign. Despite international calls for ceasefire and humanitarian access, no agreement has been reached. The conflict's trajectory suggests prolonged violence, further displacement, and deepening regional instability, leaving Gaza's future uncertain amid escalating military, political crises, and deepening humanitarian catastrophe looming.
We're joined here on In Depth by two of our distinguished guests to help unpack the complex dynamics that shape Gaza's present and future. We're joined by Dr. Brendan Kieran-Brown, international law expert from Belfast, and Khalid Dawood, the managing editor at Al Ahram Weekly in Cairo. Thank you both for joining us here on In Depth. Let me start off with Professor Brendan. What are the strategic objectives behind Israel's renewed military offensive in Gaza, and how do they align with its broader security goals?
Well, thanks. Thanks very much, as always, for having me join you. I mean, it's hard to see what strategic objectives there are here if it's not just complete control over the Gaza Strip. I mean, you've alluded to that at your introduction there. The Israeli army now control 77% of the Gaza Strip's territory. They have managed to absolutely destroy almost all of the civilian infrastructure. They have continued their relentless bombardment from the sky. They are killing children, men, women, and burning them alive in tents overnight. They are enforcing starvation on the population in Gaza. So it seems very, very clear to anyone that their goal is complete capitulation of the population in the Gaza Strip to ensure that the Gaza Strip is completely unlivable, to ethnically cleanse those who remain in the Gaza Strip, and then to take over the land and to repopulate it. And we don't need to speculate on this. We know this to be true because they have told us their intentions for the last 19 months. They have not hidden their intentions. They have documented what they have been doing. They have taken videos. They have screened them live for all of us to see. And all of us have been able to point out exactly what it is that they're planning on doing. So nothing here is a surprise.
Well, as you said, it's not surprising, but they still attempt to justify their actions by saying that they're attempting to reach some sort of strategic military objectives. But do you think that what's happening is not going to help them free, for instance, the detainees?
Well, no, I absolutely don't think they're doing anything to help themselves free what they consider to be their detainees. They have given us no indication that they care for the welfare of those that are held in Gaza, Israelis that are currently being held in Gaza. We know that they don't really care about this too much because, again, their ministers are saying very clearly that that is not their goal and their objective here. And we know that as well is because if you were really concerned about the welfare of those being held in Gaza, you probably wouldn't be bombing the place to smithereens, doing all you can to destroy Gaza from above. So they haven't exactly demonstrated too much care or concern whatsoever for those in Gaza, whether they are being held hostage or not. So I don't understand how there can be any sense that we're confused in any way. It's abundantly clear what is happening. And just to pull you up on one point at the beginning, I don't think that the tide at all is turning. This is an opportunity for Western governments to try and reclaim some of their tarnished reputation. Western governments who have provided cover for Netanyahu. So they might be saying strong statements in government, but at the same time, they're providing all of the cover. They're still providing military aid and allowing the Israelis to get away with whatever they want.
Okay, Mr. Khalid, can we get your take on this? Now, how do you interpret Israel's army control of 77% of Gaza in the context of settler colonialism and forced displacement, given what Mr. Brendan has also said, that now, the Western world is attempting to sort of dissociate with what's happening in Gaza?
Well, thanks, Reham, for having me. Indeed, there is an obvious attempt by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to increase pressure on the Hamas movement to accept the Israeli conditions for a temporary ceasefire. As you know, that's the key sticking point. The Israelis, they just don't want the release of the hostages, but they want the total defeat of Hamas, the exile of their leadership, and the disarmament of this group. So Israelis, they think that, or at least that's what the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed, that continued Israeli pressure, military pressure on the Hamas side is going to produce results that he cannot achieve through negotiations. But unfortunately, there seems to be an agreement even within Israel itself that this war has exhausted its goals, that Israel, even if it reoccupied 75%, as you say, of the Gaza Strip, this is not going to achieve the result they are looking for, because simply Hamas has threatened that if the Israeli army soldiers ever came close to the Israeli hostages, that will definitely mean an end to their lives. So obviously, the key purpose is political, and it has nothing to do with the fate of the hostages themselves, because while Israeli Prime Minister is openly stating that he wants to reoccupy Gaza and take security control there, Hamas, of course, is fighting to reach a permanent ceasefire and assure the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. And nobody knows how this kind of gap is going to be bridged between the two sides, even though the US President Donald Trump has made some statements yesterday that sounds encouraging, that there might be an agreement soon between Hamas and Israel. As we know, for the first time, the Americans are conducting direct negotiations with Hamas, and perhaps this might produce some results, because at the end of the day, there is a near agreement that it's only US President Donald Trump and the American government that can put pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to stop this war,
but
exactly like he did before getting into the White House on January 20th.
If I cut you off, Mr. Khaled, but don't you think that they align in certain ways when it comes to what's going to happen in Gaza? Because at the end of the day, the Israeli side, even though they state that they want the detainees out, they continue to talk about, occupation of major parts of Gaza and the forcible displacement of the Palestinians, which the Americans may not necessarily object to. Is this correct?
I mean, again, it's not only the Americans that are involved in this ongoing conflict. There is the rest of the world as well. Because again, I mean, if America, particularly US President Donald Trump, wants to keep his growing alliances with Arab Gulf countries after his recent tour of the region and the hundreds of billions of dollars that he's secured from them, if not up to $2 trillion, like President Trump stated, there won't be a chance that these investments will come in as long as the war in Gaza continues, because that's becoming a very embarrassing situation for all Arab governments in the region. And I don't think that it will be possible to push further for this Israeli displacement plan. I mean, again, in my opinion, this is all military and political pressure by Israel to get concessions from Hamas, while all the steps it has taken is basically reversible, exactly like we've seen after the ceasefire that came into effect on January 19, or like almost 4 months ago, because, again, it was only President Trump that said that he wants the war to stop. And again, I mean, this is, as we have seen recently from the positions of the European countries, even including Britain, for example, that has historically been very supportive in Israel. They are reviewing the cooperation agreement between the two sides, the European Union, or the free trade agreement between Israel and the UK. We've heard for the first time from the European Union, 17 countries out of 27 saying that they are ready to reconsider the partnership agreement with Israel. As you've mentioned in the introduction, the tripartite statement that was issued by Britain, Canada, and France, warning of concrete measures if Israel did not stop the war and allow the humanitarian assistance in. So basically, I mean, again, probably most of the considerations of Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu are mostly domestic. He wants to keep his alliance intact. He doesn't want to be accountable for the failures of the October 7 or for the corruption charges that he's being tried on the basis of allegations that he received bribes. So all in all, I think it's the domestic agenda that's moving Netanyahu more than anything else, even to overcome his internal divisions. We've all followed the debate in Israel concerning the appointment of a new head for the Shin Bet, the Israeli Internal Intelligence Agency. I mean, Netanyahu, again, is trying to satisfy the hardliners by appointing someone like General Zini, who's openly stated that he does not consider the release of hostages to be a priority, and that he thinks that this war is going to go forever, which basically even was contradicted by the current Israeli chief of staff, who said that there is no endless war and that the war would have to come to an end at a certain point. I mean, again, it all has to do with the pressure that U.S. President Donald Trump is going to practice on the Israeli side, and again, also to deter Israel from its so-called plan to distribute humanitarian aid within Gaza, because obviously this humanitarian aid plan has nothing to do with humanitarian purposes, and it's basically aimed at pushing Palestinians to the south and pressing more for the voluntary displacement of the Palestinian people.
If we could also get Professor Brendan's opinion on this, I'm sure, Professor, you've heard what Mr. Khaled talked about, that the only country that really can put pressure on the Israelis are the Americans, but some European countries are putting pressure. In what ways might countries like Spain, that's been outspoken since pretty much the very beginning about the recognition of a Palestinian state and them labeling Israel a genocidal state, influence the broader European Union policies towards Israel? Will there be real action, or is it just political statements like we've seen in the past?
Well, that's a very important question, because that's the point I was making. I mean, all we're hearing are sound bites here. What we're getting is the British, I'll take the British Foreign Secretary, for example, who makes a very strong statement in the House of Commons, but at the same time, on the same evening, the British government were still flying reconnaissance flights over the Gaza Strip. We're still engaged in providing military assistance to the Israeli government at the same time. So there's no point in getting excited about these statements in the House of Commons or these other statements from Macron or whatever else, unless they are backed up with meaningful action and intervention. I mean, that is literally all that we need. It's the bare minimum that we should be seeing here, actual intervention. So we should be seeing a very direct call to engage in some kind of sanctions, not sanctions later on down the line about hypothetical trade agreements that may or may not come to fruition.
But Spain is taking action, aren't they? I mean, like they're considering, have considered an arms embargo and have embargoed some material going into Gaza and to Israel.
Sure. And I was coming to Spain next, just to set the scene for that. And yes, and that is a welcome move. But of course, it's still not enough. And all of this conversation around recognition of a Palestinian state and all of this language around returning to discussions around a two-state solution, that was never designed to provide any sort of dignity or self-determination for the Palestinian people. That was always designed to pacify and constrict and to ensure that they remained subservient and second-class citizens. So we need to be very careful that we don't pour cold water on the legitimate aims and aspirations of the Palestinian people and allow it to be dictated to by European states, regardless of whether or not they are at the forefront of trying to hold Israel to account. That's the issue here. We need to be careful that we don't just pat these states on the back and say, well done. It's the same in our own situation here in Ireland. We often get told that, the Irish are very clearly the most pro-Palestinian, the most pro-supportive of the Palestinian struggle. And yet the Irish government still has a very checkered relationship, and a very suspect one when it comes to its relationship with Israel as well. So we need to be careful with some of the sound bites, is the only point that I'm making. Yes, it is, of course, very, very important that third-party states review all of their trade agreements, not just weapons, but all of their trade agreements with Israel, a state that stands accused of committing genocide, as was upheld at the International Court of Justice in January 2024, a state that is being led by a man who has an international arrest warrant on his head from the International Criminal Court. But we need third parties to do more than just give attractive sound bites in front of a media. There actually has to be action here. People are being starved to death and being relentlessly attacked and burnt alive in tents. Yes. It doesn't get more serious than this.
Yes. Mr. Khaled, you heard Professor Brendan's statements there that it's very serious. How might Israel's military actions and the associated humanitarian concerns affect its relations with key allies, including the United States? Will there be any form of action, especially with the blockade nearing the 3-month mark now and the continued bombardment of the Gaza Strip?
Well, I think I just fully agree with our colleague from Ireland. I mean, again, there's, first of all these Israeli actions that we're seeing by the European countries are long overdue. We didn't have to wait for 53,000, but even close to 54,000 right now, unfortunately, to get killed in such a manner before they start moving. And seeing the reality for what it is. I mean, again, what the Europeans and the United States are doing is bringing into question the entire legitimacy of the so-called world order, if there remains to be any order of whatsoever kind. And again, I mean, again, if we're talking in practical terms, we have several occasions that could be at least testing the serious willingness of the European nations in particular to bring serious pressure on Israel to stop its war in Gaza, topped with the upcoming meeting that's supposed to be chaired by France and Saudi Arabia in New York in mid-June to recognize the Palestinian state. I think, I mean, all over the Arab world in particular, we've been fed up with the statements coming out from France, for example, or even other European nations saying they're about to recognize a Palestinian state, but that never materializes. So hopefully by June 15, there's going to be more courageous steps from European nations besides Spain, Ireland, Norway, and Slovenia, Malta, Luxembourg. All these countries have already recognized the Palestinian state, but we're waiting for the big European nations such as France, such as Germany, such as Britain, even though it's outside the EU, to take this step of recognizing the Palestinian state, which will turn the events of the past 2 years of war, or at least giving some hope that there is prospect for a solution for the Palestinian people. The aim of the current round of negotiations should not be limited to stop the war only, but we want a permanent solution for the Palestinian issue to avoid a repetition of those kinds of war every few years due to Israel's failure and resistance to the concept of the establishment of a Palestinian state. So we have this upcoming meeting in New York. It will be a very important test for the intentions of those countries to reach a serious and a final solution for the Palestinian cause. And of course, we also have the UN Security Council, where the United States has been putting a lot of pressure since the beginning of this war to prevent any straightforward resolution demanding an end to the war, and even relating it to Chapter 7 or threatening sanctions against Israel if it doesn't take that step. Because simply we can see, I guess it's fair to say, that the entire world is just fed up with this continued Israeli war that results in tremendous human losses. The pictures of the Palestinian children getting killed because of starvation or because of getting burned alive is a testimony to how far we are from the implementation of international law, or even treating human beings equally, that they have equal rights to dignity, to live in peace, and to be able to provide the minimum of their needs, human needs, in terms of food, in terms of medicine, in terms of fuel. So these are all steps that are very important to follow in the coming weeks. Besides, and I think it was also important, the continued refusal by the United Nations to accept the Israeli plan for the distribution of aid within Gaza, because the Israeli plan is basically aimed at dividing Gaza into 3 parts and pushing more and more Palestinians towards the south, which is actually a threat to Egypt's security, because if you have more than 1 million people squeezed close to the Egyptian border, unable to get sufficient amounts of aid, this is certainly an attempt to push them to leave the Gaza Strip, and this is definitely not going to be a voluntary displacement as the Israelis have been claiming.
Okay, Professor Brendan, now you talked about what's happening in Gaza as horrible. Anyone who's seen the videos come out, it's the most documented genocide, with children being maimed and burnt alive, as you said. But Netanyahu now is accusing European leaders of anti-Semitism and has used the word anti-Semitism for the last 19 months as a deterrent of people telling them that these are war crimes. How do you think the Israeli image looks right now on a global stage, given that their only excuse is that whatever their accusations are anti-Semitic?
Well, I mean, yeah, they've completely weaponized the language of anti-Semitism, which is obviously a horrible charge. It's a scourge to be labeled as such, and they've obviously, Netanyahu by engaging in that language is doing something that's appalling and dastardly. But we would expect nothing different from a man who has been involved in committing a genocide. I mean, it's not that surprising whatsoever. But it's a very potent tool, of course. It's something that's deliberately used to try and stifle criticism of the Israeli government and their actions, and criticism of the Israeli state in general. And more importantly, you have seen a lot of European countries adopt legislation to try and define what is or is not anti-Semitism. For example, the implementation of the IHRA in the United Kingdom and in other countries has a definition that blurs the lines between criticism of the Israeli state and its actions, and then anti-Semitism in general. So it is worrying, it is challenging, and it's something that we need to be very wary of and very determined to push back against, because we can't allow this to go unchecked. We can't allow this to stick and to happen, you know. So yeah, it's been a very clear tactic, and it's been something that's been parroted across the world.
Okay, Professor Brendan Brown and Mr. Khaled Dawood, thank you both for your valuable insights and for joining us here on In Depth. Gaza remains under a severe siege, with escalating military operations causing massive casualties, displacement, and critical shortages of food and medical supplies. Political turmoil challenges Netanyahu's leadership amid international calls for urgent humanitarian relief and renewed peace efforts. That concludes today's episode of In Depth. Thank you for watching. I'm Rahamorsi. Stay tuned for more here on Q News.